If you're thinking of buying an investment property, you want to make sure that you have a good property manager on board. But how do you know if you've got a good property manager? What questions do you ask them? And how do you ensure that they manage the property correctly so that your tenant doesn't trash the property? Well, if you're looking for answers to these questions plus so much more, then this is the video for you. But this is the first time I've ever done a video like this. It's longer because I have an expert who I'm interviewing who has over 20 years of property management experience, and she's a property investor herself. So if you're looking for details about how to ensure that you get the property management side of things right with your property, then stay tuned, stay until the end, and I really hope you'll get massive value. Enjoy.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's Nero here, and welcome to a very special episode of the Property Investing Australia podcast. Now, why do I say special? Well, if you've been listening to me for a while and listening to this show, you know that almost every episode is just me sharing my thoughts about property investing, the market, some of the things you need to be aware of. But today, for the first time ever, we actually have a very special guest on the show. So instead of me talking, I'm going to be asking questions and learning just like you. Now, as this is an interview, this episode is going to be longer than our normal 10 to 15 minutes that normally every episode is, but I can promise you're in for a treat today. And I really hope you'll get a lot of value as we talk about such things like how do you choose a good property manager? How do you secure the best tenants who look after your property? How do you get the maximum rent? Some of the things you need to look out for as an investor, especially if you're looking to buy Interstate, plus so much more. So you really want to stay tuned until the end for this. But look, that's enough from me. I'm going to introduce today's guest. She's waiting there for me. So she is a multi-award-winning property manager and the founder of Brisbane-based boutique property management firm Longview, with also an office now in Melbourne. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in property management and is the author of the book Rented, the ultimate investor companion to managing your property, that walks both new and experienced investors through the 5 stages of property ownership. But in addition to that, she's actually a property investor herself and a property manager who is an actual property investor. Now, that's a very rare combination. So I'm delighted to have our first ever guest on the Property Investing Australia podcast, Lauren Robinson. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Nira. It's a pleasure to be talking to you today.
Oh, look, great to have you on board. And I know you have a very interesting story, lots of experience in property. So I'd really kind of like to start at the beginning, which is when did you sort of start looking to buy your first property and what was the motivation behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I live and breathe property. My husband's a builder, and yeah, I guess most weekends you'll find us at open homes looking at property. So I would probably, if he would allow me, I'd spend most of my time looking at houses. So I really enjoy it. But yeah, I guess I was really fortunate to have worked in an office in Brisbane, which was called Pro Rentals. It's no longer around, but it was one of the first property management only companies in Brisbane. And so I started there when I was 18. I was also studying a business degree at the time, but working there full time as well. And everyone around me really had an investor mindset. And I guess growing up, my parents had one investment property, but it probably didn't perform as well as, it could have. It was bought in a coastal area and it was fairly sleepy town. And so that was sort of my experience. And I had other relatives with commercial properties, but I never really took any interest in that. So I guess, I was lucky to be working in an office where everyone was buying investment properties. And that I was 21 at the time and sort of started to look. I was renting with friends and I thought, no, I want to buy my own investment property. And I remember my old employer saying at the time, if you purchase one property, it'll set you up for life. And I'm so glad I did now, the way the Brisbane market's gone. So
yes, absolutely. Yes. Okay, so you were very young then, when you looked to buy property. I mean, walk us through that story or that experience a little. Like as a stressful experience. I mean, you said you had people to rely on, but at that young age, most people are not thinking about buying property, or most people say they can't afford it. So what was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess living in share houses, even though I was living with friends and it was great, I really was surrounded by all these other people who were buying property and also working in property management. I was seeing investment properties every day, and I just sort of got a bug for it. And so the first property I purchased was a property that I actually wanted to live in. So I actually purchased a townhouse in Paddington in Brisbane, so fairly close in the city. And I guess what I was looking for at the time was not necessarily an investment property, or it was sort of where I wanted to live. I'm glad now that I did purchase in an area where it's had high growth and the rental yields are doing well. But at the time, I was really more looking for something that I was going to own or occupy that was safe, secure. And I had a friend move in with me and also help to pay off that mortgage. So, but I guess the first thing was initially speaking to a mortgage broker and finding out, am I even in a position where I can borrow money? And also, how much could I borrow? How much do I need in savings? So that was really interesting. And that sort of, I saw them quite early on in the journey. It took me probably a year and a half to purchase my first property because I was so I just was so hesitant. It was a lot of money at the time, and I just didn't know whether I was, I guess I just wanted to make sure I was making the right decision. I looked initially at off the plan. That was really appealing to me, having a pool in the complex and all that sort of stuff. And I think I'm glad I did not purchase that particular investment at the time because, there's so many things that I like to consider when you're buying property. So for me, that was not the right option. I bought in a small boutique complex of 8, and it was a townhouse. So there's not as many of those around. And then from there, I was able to then buy an investment property 2 years later. So, and then again, that was very different in terms of what I looked for at that point in time. So,
so you did you use the equity from that first townhouse, your own home, to then buy the investment property?
Yes, I definitely did. So, the next property was in St. Lucia, so in Queensland. So it was close
to the university.
Close to the University of Queensland. It was an area that we worked a lot in the office I was working in, and also it was a 2-bedroom, and I converted that into 3 bedrooms to increase that rental return. So it was quite a large 2-bedroom. And so previously it was quite run down, and I spent at the time maybe $28,000 renovating it, just giving it a basic tidy up and renovation. And back then, that was like 15 years ago. So back then, $28,000 could get you a new kitchen and bathroom, and you can't do that anymore. But
not for $28K, no.
No. But at the time, it could. And so it meant that I was able to increase that return by adding that additional bedroom and knowing the demographic of tenants that are likely to rent there and what they were looking for. It was all based on room rate. So I was able to increase that from, that was actually renting from $280 to $520. So all of a sudden that was, pretty much positively geared straight away. So
that's awesome. So it sounds like you picked the area first and the demographic, and then found the right property that would match that area and demographic?
That tends to be our strategy the whole time with buying investment properties. So even now, we are looking at the Gold Coast for an investment. And so now I sort of narrow it down to the particular suburb or suburbs that I want to be in. Then I look at, are we looking for capital growth, or are we looking for rental return? And then, depending on what we're actually seeking, then I explore, talk to agents, find out as much information as possible about that market and the demographic. I have some idea, but it is really great to speak to the locals on the ground to find out, well, what's this area like? What's this street like? Will this actually appeal to a family? And now we look for options of how we can, other opportunities we can have with that investment. So now we particularly look for land and houses, and whether we can develop that in the future. So it's a different strategy now than what I had when I first started investing.
Of course, because you've had some experience. So, you're more an experienced investor. You're also living and breathing property every single day between you and your husband. So that makes you a pretty powerful team combined as well. So that's awesome. I'm curious though, if we circle back to the off the plan, you said you were really interested in that, and then obviously it sounds like you made a good decision not to buy. Have you ever gone back and revisited, like if you had bought that, what would it have risen in value? How did the numbers end up working out? Was it a good decision to not go ahead with that property in terms of capital growth and rental returns?
Yes, I think it was. I mean, at the time we were seeing a lot, and I mean, I guess they are very appealing off the plan because they're typically, really nice and shiny and new, and they have every amenity that you could possibly want as an owner-occupier or an investor. But I guess when I look back now and think, well, perhaps if I had bought that, we then had an oversupply of apartments in the Brisbane market. So all of a sudden, the capital growth that those properties were achieving was definitely depressed. And I guess also, the rental increases were not as significant. So I think, whenever I'm talking to investors, I always suggest, look at things that are a little bit more unique. And it depends if you're wanting to choose a lifestyle property and you're wanting to live there and you would like to have a high-rise complex with all the, the lift and all those benefits, then that's a different strategy. But I think when you're looking as an investment and you're looking for, I think looking for something a little bit more unique is definitely going to help you get that capital growth and also a higher rental return.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, I think, one of the conversations I have with, our clients as a buyer's agent is, should you be going for new and, off the plan, or should you be going for something as established? And, almost always I will be saying, you want to look at something established because that's where you're going to get more capital growth, especially if there can't increase supply. So I think anytime you're buying something off the plan, you're buying in an area where they can easily increase supply, which is always going to compromise on capital growth. So sounds like you made a great decision, not to go ahead with that, which is fantastic. Because I think, with property, if you go after the shine and, seems great, but then when you realize that it hasn't worked out for you, unwinding that is A, money, but B, time, right?
Yes.
Property is not a liquid investment. You can't buy today, sell tomorrow. It takes time to, realize you made an error, sell it. And you can, especially if someone's a bit older, as a lot of our clients are, it's like it can really, diminish their ability to achieve that retirement goals that they're after. So well done to you, obviously, on making that sort of shift. And now you're an investor. So I guess the question then, someone who's now, into property management and, got offices now in Brisbane and Melbourne, a common question I get, and a lot of our clients, again, they're from Sydney, they're from Melbourne, they're looking to buy in Brisbane. And often I'll say, you don't want to apply a Sydney or Melbourne mindset to buying in Brisbane because, whatever's said on Queenslanders are different. Now that you've got some, offices in Melbourne versus Brisbane, what are some of the differences you see in, I guess, what people look for when they're living in Brisbane versus living in Melbourne?
I guess like our sister company and our main office is in Melbourne. We've recently rebranded Rental Results to Longview, Queensland. So, but I guess, I mean, entering any new market as an investor and for myself entering, the Gold Coast market, which I don't have as much knowledge of, streets in particular areas, what I would suggest is really getting to know the agents in that local area and speak to as many local experts as possible. So, that's where an amazing buyer's agent comes into play, like yourself. So really making the most of that knowledge that they've got. So, I mean, we're even attending an auction this week, and I've actually contacted a number of different sales agents, not related to the property, just to ask their thoughts on the street, and just try to pick as many brains as possible, because from what I see as someone who doesn't live down there, I kind of feel like, oh, well, it's walking distance to the shop, it's not too far from the beach. I look at those things, but they might say, well, actually, 3 doors down, there's a development application, or, that's just that local knowledge. So I think speaking to as many experts as possible in that particular market is really quite essential.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it echoes, everything that I say is that, yes, you want to look at data, and data is great. But once you start looking at, the actual properties to buy, the streets, in certain areas, you could be 3 streets away and it's a totally different demographic in that pocket of that suburb,
Yes.
right? And so that only comes from on the ground knowledge, which comes from speaking to, as you said, locals and people who you can trust. And I think, sounds like you've got a very, very similar approach when you're looking to buy properties in a particular area that you don't live in, getting that real micro understanding of what are the A-grade pockets within a good suburb to buy in that are going to not only give you better growth, but also allow you, a better demographic when it comes to tenants.
Definitely, yes, exactly. And I think, for us now, because we're looking at opportunities to possibly develop in the future, or, understanding, well, if we were to do something like that in the future, is there a demand for that? Is that demographic actually looking for that? What are they spending? All of that sort of stuff, because once you start developing something, you're really outlaying quite a lot of money, and you want to make sure you get that return.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so as a property manager and a property investor, and I really think that mix is very, very unique. I guess the question I've got to ask you is: do you manage your own properties?
No.
Ooh, okay. So now you're going to have to tell me why, because a lot of people think that they should manage their own properties to save on property management commissions or whatever. So tell me why you shouldn't manage your own property as an investor, even when you have the experience you do.
I pay commission to manage, to our office to manage our investment properties, and I really just think we've got quite a few now, and I think for us we treat it as a business. So again, it's tax deductible, the property management fees. I think it keeps me at arm's length. So sometimes, and especially for the investment properties that we might have renovated, or perhaps I've lived there, or my husband's lived in the property, like it's a different feeling to when it's an investment only property. So I just like to keep the emotion out of it. I just like to treat it as a business. More than happy to manage other investment properties for other people. Obviously I've got the knowledge and I can do it, but I just think for your own investment properties, I just like to keep it and treat it as a business.
Look, I couldn't agree more. And I think for anyone and listening, if someone like Lauren with her experience doesn't manage her own properties, essentially you shouldn't. I know I don't, for a whole variety of reasons. And part of it also is it limits you, because, it almost becomes a second job when you've got, multiple properties, right? And it's better to have experts who are close to the property who can look after it, So definitely agree with that. And I guess then that brings the question is, how do you choose a good property manager? Or, put differently, what makes the difference between a good property manager versus someone who maybe just wants to get your business and gives you a discount on fees, and that's their entire selling proposition?
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's the thing. A lot of investors think that the service is the same for all property management companies, and they don't really understand, well, what could be the difference between a good property manager and perhaps a not so good property manager, and how is that going to actually affect their investment in the future. So I think for me, I always look at, how long that property manager's been with the office, because consistency and the time actually in the role. So someone who's doing the entry condition report, you really want ideally them to be doing the vacate at the end, because that's where I see a lot of issues come about. We offer a service guarantee where we guarantee we return calls the same business day, and that's and emails. And that's another issue I hear from a lot of investors, is that they're emailing the property manager, they don't hear back, they don't really have time to chase it up, but they have to keep making time to chase things up, and there's nothing more frustrating. And I think you really want to know that they're really proactive. So, and things are transparent. So having an online database or online system that you can log in and be able to see things yourself, like in terms of where the rent's paid up to, all your statements, your entry condition report, your routine inspections. I think that's fairly important. Even if you don't want to look at it, it's nice to know that you have that option if you wanted to. And I also think it comes back to the systems and processes that particular office has. I guess when I started the business rental results, we started from scratch, and so our systems have definitely evolved over that time. And I think really when you're looking at the property manager, you want to know, well, what systems they have in place, what's the benefit to both the tenant and the landlord, and how's that actually going to impact your investment. But I think transparency, longevity of team members and staff is really the key to that, and also office processes.
Fantastic. And so, when we're buying properties for clients, and sometimes, they're the property is already tenanted, and then there's a tenanted, there's an existing property manager, which is generally just, they're not a specialist, they're just affiliated with the sales office per se, and then we're looking to shift them to a specialist property manager. A lot of clients are somewhat concerned because they feel that, by moving it, are we upsetting the dynamic? And what I mean by that is, if there's an existing relationship with an existing property manager, existing tenant, isn't that better to keep things as is versus moving them over to a specialist property manager? What are your thoughts on that, Lauren?
I think really what's important is to interview the current manager, and you'll get a gut feel. So I'm never going to say to someone, you definitely need to leave that agent, because, if that particular property manager is doing a good job, if you're happy with the level of service, and they can't, I'd suggest interviewing a couple of property managers when you're purchasing an investment property. You want to make sure that you feel comfortable with the relationship. You want to understand that, or you want to feel confident that they understand the legislation. They're going to look after your best interest as an investor. Also, they're going to look after the tenants, because essentially the tenants are your clients. So if there is an opportunity, I'd be asking the tenants, how's your experience been renting the investment? Probably just to find out, are they happy? Has communication been really, have they been on top of the communication? Because the last thing you want is a tenant reporting maintenance to the property manager, that not being communicated back to you, perhaps, things slipping. So if that was an opportunity, I'd probably suggest taking that up. But I definitely think interviewing a couple of property managers is a good idea, including the existing one. And it shouldn't just be a given that you continue on with that agent, because at the end of the day, that investment, you're spending a lot of money. You want to make sure that you're choosing the right person to represent you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that I do on top of that is, being an investor myself, when we're inspecting these properties that have already got a tenant there, the condition in which the tenant is keeping the property, and the condition in which the property manager is allowing the tenant to keep the property in, is a big indicator for me of whether they're, I want to look at them going forwards, or change property management for the clients, because, I think that a tenant should be looking after the property to a pretty reasonable standard. And if all of a sudden, there's stuff there that, they may claim to want to fix in the future, but these things are not being picked up early on, there's a chance that those issues are just going to spiral out of control. And that's when really you want to know that the property manager is picking them up at their regular inspection. So, I agree with everything you said. And I think, that's why looking at property managers' existing work, when means, the properties that got under management now, if you could look at them, also gives you a good sense of, who's good, who maybe you want to shift around them as well. But if a property has tenants living in it, are there any contractual agreement, anything we need to worry about if we're going to shift to a new property manager?
No, so it's very straightforward. So once that property settles, you have, as a new owner, you have the opportunity to choose anyone that you want to work with. So the first thing that you would expect a property manager to do is contact your tenants and organise to go out and meet with them, because you want them to if they haven't already inspected the property, you want them to have an understanding of the investment property, have just a different set of eyes, walk through and have a look at the investment. Perhaps there might be suggested improvements for the future on ways to increase that rental return, or it might just be another set of eyes looking at any maintenance that might have come up. I mean, you're likely to have a building inspection, so you're aware of certain things, but if you haven't, then it's just a different set of eyes looking at the investment. And perhaps from a risk management point of view, you just want someone else to have a look. But I think really it's important for that property manager to establish rapport with that tenant too. So the tenant should know, okay, well, this is my new agent. this is how I reach them, this is how I pay my rent, this is how I report maintenance. So this is how often my inspections are going to occur. So all those basic things, that's really important that the tenant understands.
Yes.
But I think really a good agent should be inspecting a property sort of every 3 months. In Queensland, we're allowed to go through maximum of every 3 months. And, I personally want my investment properties looked at every 3 months. I think that comes around very quickly. And I also think it's just another set of eyes, making sure, are there maintenance issues that perhaps the tenant is not aware of that need to be rectified before it turns into something big? Or, just is there things that the tenant, like maybe it's perhaps they're not cleaning the shower screen and soap scum's building up on the shower screen. So minor things that if they were addressed quickly before it was left to, become worse, that can be addressed quickly and perhaps something that the tenant's not even aware of.
Got it. Okay. So if you are inspecting your property every 3 months, that's definitely my expectations, for my properties in Queensland as well. What about insurance, especially landlords insurance? Is that something you think is important, or is it just kind of a unnecessary extra that people are upsold into?
No, I definitely think it's essential because you have to have, so obviously you have to have insurance on the property, but also it also covers you for public liability, contents. So there's a number of things it actually covers you, and obviously landlord insurance. But so I definitely think that that's important. And also considering the cost. So you're looking at less than $400 a year for the landlord insurance policy. We do have a couple of clients who may have, 60 and like they might be developers and they have 60 or so investment properties. They choose not to, but again, that's a risk they take. It does add up when you've got a number of investments, but I always get it for my own investment properties. And it's like
Absolutely.
any insurance policy. I think, it's quite important. We're dealing with humans at the end of the day. And I think I've seen I've been in property management over 20 years now. We can have amazing tenants, but something might happen in their life. So perhaps it's, loss of job, a death in the family, an illness, something might happen that just puts them off course. And all of a sudden you might have an issue where they're unable to pay the rent and, that spirals. Or we've got to understand that it's not sort of, it's a human element that we need to just be aware of.
Absolutely. And I always recommend to my clients, landlord's insurance, yes, it's tax deductible. It's, what is it, $5, $6, $7 a week for peace of mind. It's cost of a large Starbucks coffee or whatever, right? And it just means that anything goes wrong, you just know that you're covered from a tenant perspective. And as you said, you're dealing with humans. And I've been investing, personally, 21 years. I've had a situation where tenants were there for 3-4 years. It was perfect, and then all of a sudden they stopped paying the rent, and it was because, as you said, they lost their job, right? And it was the landlord's insurance that picked up the bill, etc., and sorted everything out. So I think getting landlord's insurance is very, very important. But as someone who probably deals with that quite frequently, what are some of the most common claims you see under landlord's insurance that need to be taken care of?
Yeah, luckily it is rare that we have to lodge a landlord insurance policy, landlord insurance claim, but sometimes it can be like an abandoned premises. So I think, probably in the 20 years, we might have had 2 abandoned premises, or it could just be a tenant who is unable to pay the rent. It's escalated to court. Perhaps there's been a warrant of possession issued, so the police get involved. They don't move out. So, by then they've eaten into their bond. They're probably unlikely to move out and have it bond clean ready, and perhaps there might be some damage. So, all of those things. And then under the legislation, we have to store that furniture if it's over $1,500 a week, or those possessions. So, it can really escalate. And again, we've really only had that happen twice ever. Once at our office and once in a previous role. So these are not common occurrences, but I think just for peace of mind. So it covers you for contents insurance too. So perhaps there's a water leak, and it might damage, certain things in the property that aren't covered under your building insurance. So it is good just to have that. I've even had to lodge an insurance claim for my own investment property because the tenant's washing machine, their pipe burst. So,
There we go.
It's just accidental. Things happen.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, similar to you, in the last 21 years, I've made, I think, 2 claims under landlord's insurance. So it's very rare, but I can tell you I was very glad to have that insurance both times I made that claim. It just alleviates the stress. You don't have that massive, cash flow loss. All of that is, I think, very, very important. So, highly recommend landlord's insurance to everyone listening. So look, when an investor now is thinking about, okay, I've got my investment property, who should I go with in terms of managing the property? What's the difference, I guess? Because, what I notice, especially as a buyer's agent, almost every selling agent, the moment they know that my client is an investor, they want to grab the property management side of things, right? And then generally the way they'll try and do it is we'll give you a discount, whatever, that sort of stuff. It's never about service. It's always about fees. So why, I guess, should someone then go with a specialist property manager versus just the listing agent on their property?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it comes down to longevity of staff, how long they've been there, what are their processes within the office. And I definitely wouldn't base a decision purely on fees. I mean, obviously we all as an investor, it comes down to the bottom line, and you do care about what the return's going to be and how much is that investment going to cost you. But I think at the end of the day, having an average property manager who perhaps doesn't have the training, who doesn't know the legislation, because I mean, we in the last few years, and it seems like every 3 months we're getting legislation changes. So it's really important to make sure the team are being trained on a regular basis as to what's going on, what are their processes, because we've had a lot of changes where if we miss a periodic tenancy, where a property slips into a periodic tenancy now, that can have serious repercussions as to how you can even get that tenant out. So I think it comes back to what's their knowledge, what's their understanding. I mean, a lot of the property managers in our office are investors as well. So I think that gives you a different spin as well. And I think really interviewing different people, you will know and you'll understand how comfortable you feel. But I do have a list of questions that I'll send to you if you want to share with your listeners at any stage of questions that you might want to be asking a property manager. Because I think once you start interviewing, you'll get a feel as to whether you feel comfortable that they could manage your investment or not. And often when we're looking at fees, there's typically only, 1% difference between that, which, when you're looking at the investment, that it's, again, less than like $10 a week sort of thing. So I think just weighing up how much is the difference and what is that person going to offer me that the other one can't. So
yes. I couldn't agree more. I think, property management is something that you really need to take a long-term view over, because, sometimes the issues there don't surface until quite some time. And then if you've gone with the cheaper option who maybe isn't giving you that same quality of service, whatever you may have served in fees is nothing compared to the extra costs that you're going to incur.
Definitely. I mean, and I think it also can be quite stressful too when you've got a property that's managed by someone that's unresponsive, that perhaps is not on the ball, that, if the tenants aren't happy in your investment, and so therefore you've got turnover of tenants often, that can, that all cost you money, and that can be quite stressful. Like we actually went to an investment property of our own in another area that we don't manage properties in, and we met the property manager and we asked them, "Oh, you're the property manager?" And they said, "Oh, I guess the property manager's just left and I'm sort of lumped with this." And,
red flag.
And I guess, and the tenants weren't happy because they're like, "Oh, we reported this last inspection, nothing's been done." And so I think, attending, if you possibly can, your own inspection once a year or once every couple of years, just to see for yourself, and even ask the tenant, "How's everything going? Are you happy here?" Really just is an eye opener, because straight away we were like, "Oh, we thought this investment was going well." And all of a sudden we're walking through the property and we're realizing that all these things that, we would like our property to be looking like and presenting a certain way, it's not.
Fantastic. So I guess that, dovetails into something really important is, again, a lot of my clients, as they build their portfolio, they don't just buy out of area, they're buying interstate, right?
Yes.
So they don't have the opportunity to, just drive by on a Saturday to check the property out and make sure, everyone's doing what they said they were. So, how do you manage, I guess, investors who are interstate, Sydney or Melbourne, buying in Brisbane, for example? I know that's very common. A lot of our clients
Yeah.
do that. What do you feel that some of them need to be aware of that perhaps the locals already are, and any sort of advice you can offer someone who's buying interstate and, in terms of having their property managed properly?
Yeah, I mean, we deal with a lot of investors that are interstate, overseas, and I think it's really finding out, well, how do they like to be communicated with? So we've got some owners who, perhaps if they're overseas and the time difference, they might like to talk to us via WhatsApp, or perhaps they might want to do a Zoom inspection. And so I guess asking the property manager, especially if you like to physically attend the inspection or you want to be involved, perhaps they offer a virtual tour of the property, so they might be able to walk you through via FaceTime or Zoom whilst you're there. Maybe it's only once a year, but at least then you are getting a feel for it. Perhaps they offer video routine inspections. They might also provide photos, which I actually think are quite important, that there's photos provided at a routine inspection, they're date stamped, and you're getting the reports the same day. And really, I'd probably just ask for a copy of a routine inspection or an example of a routine inspection, just so you can see how thorough they are, because we've all seen reports where it's sort of just very generic, a couple of just room photos, which mostly shows the tenant's furniture.
Yeah.
And I think that just doesn't tell enough.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think, you really want a really detailed report. For me, with my investment properties, I think it's important that the storerooms and the garages are inspected as well, because I'm always looking, okay, are there movement cracks or are there things like that, perhaps, so there's things that I want to be inspected. Or, I think it's just really speaking to that property manager and making sure they understand your expectations. Are there areas you particularly want them to look at the routine inspection? They are a representative of you. So, so I think it's just that having that communication, which is where that longevity of the team members is so important, because you don't want to be establishing that relationship with a property manager who you trust, and then, unfortunately in the industry, every 6 months is the turnaround. So I just think that can create extra stress as well.
Look, absolutely. I think, it's a great, idea to, instruct your property manager if, at least once a year you can do a Zoom inspection, so you can see it as they walk through, because as good as photos are, by the time they get compressed and they get sent through to you on a Word document or however it gets sent through to you, uploaded, it's like you can't see it as well, and it's too easy to miss stuff. But a Zoom inspection is great. And they said, if even every couple of years or whatever, you're on a trip somewhere, it's no longer tax deductible, unfortunately. But if you can inspect your property, and it just gives you a sense that, you're having a look at your property, you can get some direct feedback from the tenant, and it just allows you to keep an eye on your property manager, who, as you said, is really an extension of you. It's like, I guess, having a business and having a staff member who you're checking in on every 12 months just to see how things are going, right? And I think any good property manager would welcome that, because it allows them to build a stronger relationship with you. So I think, that's a very, very important tip. So awesome. So you said you used to work in property management, and then you went ahead and founded your own company. So tell us about that. How did that come to be?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I had been working in a leasing role, property management, business development manager role. So for 11 years. And the first company I worked in for 8 years, they sold the business. And so that was an amazing company, and I probably would have stayed there. It was exceptional. And then the next company I went to was predominantly property management that had over 1,200 managements and really one salesperson. So I particularly wanted an office that specialised in property management and had that focus on training as well. And I worked there for 3 years. And then I actually had a couple of different people approach me, like a developer and another person who had a commercial real estate, to talk about whether I would start an office with them. And I just finished my business degree. So it kind of aligned. It's just the right timing for me. And then Yeah, and I guess I did go into business with a developer initially, so he had 20% in the business.
Yep.
And then we kind of he was exceptional, and he had a few different businesses that he was part of.
Yes.
And I think we just decided that he was sort of looking for someone to manage more of an on-site management role, as opposed to what I was looking for, which I really loved meeting different clients. I liked seeing different properties. Like that's what I really enjoy about property management. And so he decided that he would sell the management rights and he'd sign back 20% in my business. But I was lucky enough to continue working from his office for the next 6 months.
Nice.
And amongst other people in the business
Yeah.
too, that were really great. So yeah, and I think from there
Fantastic.
it just grew. And I think knowing, trying to understand what your clients are looking for in a property manager and knowing how we can provide that as a service agent is really
Yeah.
important.
And so what areas do you manage properties in? You said you got something in Brisbane, sister office in Melbourne, where do you manage properties, and how would someone who's listening be able to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to speak to any investor if I can help in any way. I'd love to speak to people. We actually love to get involved before they've actually purchased a property. So, happy to provide rental appraisals, talk to them about the demographics in the area, the vacancy rates, just provide as much information as possible. Yeah, so I love talking to clients at that stage as well. But yeah, I guess we manage properties within 20 kilometres of the Brisbane CBD, so quite a wide range.
Yes.
And our Melbourne office, we manage over 3,000 properties down there. So we actually cover quite a large area in Melbourne. So
Right.
If anyone is looking for an investment property or wants to speak to somebody else just for another opinion or just have a chat about, are they getting the most out of their asset, then more than happy to speak to them and see if we could possibly help in any way.
Fantastic. Wow. Okay. Well, look, thank you so much, Lauren. That's I think it's been just a lot of gold nuggets here shared. But are there any common questions you get from investors that maybe we haven't covered here today? What haven't I asked you?
I think I often get asked, what are the best ways to increase the rental return? And so, I think, and I even got asked that yesterday, are there specific things? And I think as a property manager, we are looking for risk management. So we want to ensure that the property is safe. We want to try and minimize that risk. But also we want to make sure that you're getting the highest return from your asset. So some of the things when you're looking at a property as to whether you can increase that return is really understanding the demographic and then what are they particularly looking for. So in Queensland, often it's air conditioning. They're prepared to pay more for that. Perhaps it's a family, and if the property doesn't have a dishwasher, then those types of convenience things that tenants will pay for. If it's a family and it's close by to schools, they're typically going to have a pet. So, it's just understanding that demographic. And I think it's a case-by-case basis for each property. But that's why it's really important that before you, and obviously when you're working with buyers agents as well, you'll be working with some great property managers who can provide additional insight. But it's about having an amazing team around you that can really guide you. And I think it's not just about having one person on your side. There's probably about 6 people that need to be involved in the purchase of an asset that can really guide you. So, yeah.
Would agree with that completely. Okay. And look, right now, there's no doubt, especially in Queensland, massive rental crisis, right? Not enough properties in most areas, lots of people looking to rent. I guess, how do you manage that, and how do you ensure you're choosing the best tenants from a list? Because now it's no longer take the first person you get. You're probably getting multiple applications for any good quality property. So how do you go through that process to ensure that the landlord gets the best tenant?
Yeah. Ultimately, it's the landlord's decision and we guide them on that. We're meeting the tenants at the property. But I think making sure, and ideally, we always encourage tenants to provide a cover letter to explain sort of more information about who they are and those sorts of things. At the end of the day, an investor wants to know that they're going to pay the rent on time, look after their asset and, be respectful. So I think they're sort of the 3 key things that an investor wants wants in a tenant.
Absolutely,
And I
yes.
think
Yep.
sometimes an application form does not give enough information, which is why we suggest a cover letter is really quite key to that, especially
Yep.
if the younger tenants, maybe they don't have a history, a rental history. So I think it really comes down to a case-by-case basis, but making sure, obviously, all those applications are thoroughly checked. So when we're checking applications, we're checking whether they've ever been blacklisted. We're checking whether the tenant, if they've owned their own home, we're doing searches around that. If they're rented before, we're doing all their reference checks. If they're self-employed, we're speaking to accountants. We're asking for financial statements. If they're working for someone, we're speaking to their employers. So really gathering as much information as possible to try and really safeguard that decision.
Yes.
But I think it starts really from the inspection. So the minute they're turning up, how are they presenting? How are they coming across? And our leasing team, our leasing manager, she's been in property management for over 12 years. So she really gets to have a gut feel around tenants, but also, she speaks to them at that point in time. And then from there, it's, reassessing all their applications to make sure they all check out as best as possible. Typically, we present all applications to a client, and then we might narrow that down to, the top 3. And so perhaps we process those top 3. What we're also seeing in this market, where there definitely is a rental shortage, but we're also seeing that tenants are also applying for numerous properties. So processing those and making sure that turnaround time is as fast and rapid as possible is essential, because they might apply for multiple properties, and they might just choose, okay, well, we've been approved for this one, let's just go with that, because it's so hard to find a property, and we might lose a good tenant because it's taking longer to process. So I think we want to make sure all the applications are thoroughly checked, but it needs to be actioned immediately, and that should be the number one priority for the office.
Yeah, speed of turnaround, because you're right. If I'm thinking, if I was renting right now, I'm not going to be putting all my eggs in one basket. If I see 5 properties that are somewhat suitable, I'm just going to go for them. And if I even get maybe my third preference, but it's accepted first, I'm more likely to say yes to that, purely because you have no idea that the others are going to come through or not, right? So turnaround, I think, makes a big difference. Tell me about pets. Now, I know there's been a lot of changes in legislation around tenants having pets, and owners not necessarily allowed to say that tenants can't have pets. But I think a lot of owners who don't have their own pets have concerns around, will the pets damage the property, etc., around that. So what are some of the safeguards you can put in place and to address some of the concerns that a lot of investors have with tenants having pets?
Yeah, I mean, I guess bearing in mind that majority of landlord insurance will cover pet damage as well. Most tenants, especially families, tend to have pets. So it has to be reasonable that the property could accommodate a pet. So you can say no if, for example, there's no yard and it's a larger dog and those sorts of things. So I think, again, it's not a blanket owners can't say no to pets, because if the property is not suitable, then there is ways around that. But it's just, if you have got a fully fenced yard and a tenant wants to have a pet, it is a much more difficult process to say no, but you can put stipulations around it. So perhaps it is that the dog's outside only, or perhaps whatever pet it might be, that it's outside. You might have concerns that it might damage the polished floorboards, for example, which is reasonable. And so, therefore you put a stipulation around it that the pet's to be outdoors. So I think in some ways it's a good thing that they've allowed pets, because a lot of families do have pets, and I think, and a lot of tenants have pets in general. We have a pet at home, and I think there's definitely good pet owners and there's perhaps not so responsible pet owners. And I think
well said.
I think it's just making sure that, like we actually ask for pet references these days, and we get a pet resume. So getting as much information.
A pet resume. Okay. You've got me interested now. What does that mean?
And that's actually been in place long before this legislation. So we want to know as much information about that particular pet as possible. And then we would even look into the breed and what, is that breed known for barking? And perhaps if it's in a unit, there might be issues around that. So, and then just addressing that with the tenant. So, how will that be alleviated? Perhaps it barks when there's no one home. So are they going to take it to work with them? Or, what can we do to try and have a happy solution for everyone? So,
absolutely. So, with all the rental crisis and whatever's happening right now, I don't see it changing anytime soon. And so I think, choosing the right property manager, I think, is more important than ever, because it's so easy these days in many areas to grab a tenant that it's not, can you get my property rented? It's, how do you choose the right property manager? How do you ensure they're looking after your property and choosing the right tenant? And I think, some of the advice you've shared today, Lauren, I think has been invaluable for people in this current market, because I think the concerns around a property investor and tenant will always be there, but they're very different today to say what they were 5 years ago, when there was an undersupply of tenants and oversupply of properties in many areas, or was roughly in equal market. But here, and when you have more tenants than properties in most half decent areas around Australia, it now comes down to choosing the right tenant and having the right property manager in place. So, Lauren, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot as well, and that's what I love about this game, is that you're always learning from experts. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, and also how can anybody, if they want to get in touch with you, how can they reach out to you on social media or your office? So give us a plug, Lauren, go for it.
Oh, no, thank you. No, it's been my pleasure, Nero. I guess more than happy to speak to anyone who would like any information or wants to chat. So you can reach out to me at lauren.robinson@longview.com.au. Otherwise, feel free to call our office, which is 31237373. The rented book.
07?
07, yes.
Yes. And I'll have all those links and numbers in the show notes as well. So anyone listening, you don't need to remember it, so I'll have them in the show notes. But Lauren, sorry to cut you off. You were going to tell us about the book.
The book, so that's available it's got its website, which is rentedbook.com.au, and I will also share with you, so you can share with the audience the list of questions to ask for property managers when you're interviewing, because I think sometimes we don't know what we should be asking apart from what fees do you charge. There's so many other questions that you really want to be looking into to make sure you get the right fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, thank you, Lauren, for you listening in. Look, I'll definitely have everything in the show notes. I'll get my team to create a link on our site to those list of questions that Lauren's going to provide as well, so you can get all of that. So, you'll definitely have all that in the show notes, Lauren. But look, again, thank you so much. This has been, just amazing to, chat to you. And, as our first ever guest as well, I think I did well in choosing the right guest. So thank you, Lauren. It's been awesome.
No, my pleasure, Nero. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And look, for everyone else, we'll see you next week, when it'll probably just be myself. So we'll be back to our normal episodes then. So thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.